is a rare privilege and a distinction for Thomas Nelson Community College to welcome to its campus a man of national educational prominence, Mr. Robert Atwell. Educated at Worcester College in Ohio and the University of Minnesota, Mr. Atwell has been the recipient of numerous honorary doctorates. Having served as president of Pitzer College in Claremont, California, and vice chancellor of the University of Wisconsin at Madison, Mr. Atwell moved to the position of executive vice president with the American Council of Education in 1978, a position that he held for 6 years. In 1984, he assumed the presidency of the American Council of Education. That is an umbrella organization for all institutions in higher education, nearly 3,100 of them in the United States. Mr. Atwell, in his various duties, works to represent these institutions as he appears before Congress to ensure that federal aid to higher education not only continues, but that it continues at an increased rate. He has been very active in the reform of intercollegiate athletics in higher education, and most recently has been busily preparing a national agenda for higher education for the upcoming presidential campaign. It is with great pleasure and it is our distinct privilege to have deliver to us the inaugural address by Mr. Robert Atwell.
Thank you very much. You neglected to mention that I was the president of my 4th grade class. Indeed, I was the president of my 4th grade class 2 years in a row. Mr. President and senators and distinguished platform people and representatives of other institutions here assembled, men and women of the faculty who do the real work of this institution and the students for whom it exists. It is an honor for me to be with you on this joyful occasion when you celebrate the new leadership of this institution. Now, I confess to you that this event would seem to have been a long time in coming. A long courtship somehow doesn't seem like an apt metaphor, nor does baptism, since the total immersion has already happened for Bob Templin, and indeed he's surfaced for his first of many deep breaths, I'm sure. It occurred to me that it's somewhere really between a bar mitzvah and a funeral. That's really where we are. But perhaps the best way to describe this is a reaffirmation of the marriage vows. That's about as close as I could come in ecclesiastical terms to what we are about today. But I am very happy for this institution that you have the good fortune of having Bob Templin as your new leader, a person clearly of uncommon courage, wisdom, and good humor, a combination not always found in the sometimes stuffy timidity of college presidents. I have to tell you a story about a college president, since I know so many of them so well. There is the story of the college president who died and went to hell. It seems that the faculty had voted for it. It seems that the students had demanded it, and the board of trustees had arranged it. But the odd thing was that he was there for a full semester before he realized that he wasn't back on campus. Friends, I want to talk very briefly this morning about the changing nature of the world. It may not be readily apparent on a beautiful fall morning why any of that would be terribly relevant to a community college in Southside Virginia. But I would suggest that whatever the location, whatever the student body composition, whatever the heritage of the institution, we do have a responsibility as institutions of higher learning to understand and describe the world in which our students will live. So I invite you to consider a few somewhat disturbing facts about that world. If we think of the world as consisting of 100 people, 67 are poor, 55 have annual incomes of less than $600, 50 are living in substandard housing and without safe drinking water, 47 are illiterate, 25 are hungry and malnourished. 6 of these 100 people are Americans, but that 6% consumes 33% of the income of the entire world. Only one of these 100 people hold a baccalaureate degree. Within our own nation, 30% of our wealth is now concentrated in 5% of our population, and since 1981, the richest 1/5 of our American households gained $25 billion in disposable income, and the poorest 1/5 lost $7 billion. That hardly sounds like a promising world, nor does it sound like a very fair American society. I call to your attention some other dimensions of our international existence. We are in the midst of a very cold shower about America's place in the world. Our military experience in Vietnam, our economic experience with the oil crises of the mid and late 1970s, and the fact that the Japanese have surpassed us in so many respects suggests that we are far less than invincible. We can no longer dominate the world economically nor militarily. It will take an arms agreement not only to save the world from nuclear destruction, but simply to allow us any hope of maintaining the kind of educational and social infrastructure necessary to retain our competitiveness in the world. A word on that C word, competitiveness, in a minute. But the simple fact is that the current younger generation may well be the first in the history of this nation who will not be better off than their parents. A word on competitiveness. In many respects, I find it a code word for how America can continue to consume disproportionate shares of the world's goodies. Competitiveness conjures up all the macho sports imagery so compelling to Americans. Competitiveness suggests winners and losers. I ask simply, who do we want to lose while we win? Do we want the Japanese, who are providing the capital for at least 30% of our current borrowing and who are potentially a major market for our goods and services? Do we want the Germans to be losers, the French, the Taiwanese? I would simply suggest that the rhetoric ought to shift from win-lose to win-win, with cooperation the theme rather than competition, because we will lose trade wars and no one wins other kinds of wars. Let's look at the changing composition of our own society, turning first to families. In 1955, 60% of the households in the United States consisted of a working father, a housewife mother, and 2 or more school-age children. In 1980, that kind of family unit was 11%, and today it's about 7%. It is all well and good to be nostalgic about the basic American family. The truth is, there aren't many of them left. Of every 100 children born today, 12 will be born out of marriage, and great numbers will be born to parents who divorced before the child is age 18, and 41 will reach age 18 normally. Every day in America, 40 teenage girls give birth to their 3rd child, and most of these mothers are not married. About half these mothers are 15 to 17 years of age, and about 1/3 of them never finish high school. Teenaged females in America are more than twice as likely to get pregnant than in any other developed nation in the world. And the evidence is this is not because of any higher levels of sexual activity. The major difficulty is the inability of many American young people to get sex education or contraception. And the results are about 500,000 babies each year born with a high likelihood of being educationally retarded or difficult to teach. If we turn to the age distribution of our population, that we find that we have an aging society. It's aging by reason of declines in childbearing among adults and the fact that people live longer, to the point where those graduating from college in the next few years, when they retire at around the year 2030, there will be 65 million people over the age of 65, more than double the present number. And the percentage of the elderly in the population will grow from 12% to 21% over that same period in which those baby boomers will be reaching old age. When I retire, there will be fewer than 3 people to pay for my Social Security compared to 15 when my father retired. And that 12% of the population, which is over age 65, receives 51% of all government expenditures for social services. Largely as a consequence of Social Security and Medicare improvements, a child is 6 times more likely than an elderly person to be living in poverty. And in 1970, not so long ago, an older person was more likely to be poor. Only about 12% of the elderly are poor, in contrast to 25% of kids under 18. And that figure approaches 50% for minority kids. Of all Americans living in poverty today, 40% are under age 18. A young person joining the labor force today will have to pay $50,000 in taxes over his or her working life just to pay the interest on the deficits which have been added to the federal debt in the past 5 years alone. Let's look at the minority composition of our society. California now has a majority of minorities in its elementary schools. We don't even have words to describe that. Half the states have public school populations which are more than 1/4 minority, and all 25 of the largest urban school districts have a majority of minorities. By the year 2010, or maybe sooner depending on immigration rates, more than 1/3 of the nation will be black or Hispanic, contrasted with 20% today. And minorities are not completing high school, particularly Hispanics with a 40 to 50% dropout rate and rising. And the participation rates in higher education for blacks are declining absolutely and proportionately. Nearly 13% of the population is black and 7.2% Hispanic. But blacks are less than 9% of college enrollments and dropping, and Hispanics are a dismal 4.3% and rising all too slowly. The reality is that except for Asians, minority participation in education declines at every level. We can speculate about the reasons for declining minority participation in education, but the effect is unarguable. We are in danger of creating a permanent social underclass consisting of large numbers of unemployed and unemployable minorities, poor and undereducated white children. The cost of welfare will be staggering, and we need to remember that the cost of keeping a person in prison far exceed the cost of keeping him or her in college. It is said that it costs $23,000 a year on the average to keep someone in the state pen and $5,000 a year to send them to Penn State. And I have to say that I am deeply impressed with President Templin's commitments to increase minority enrollments and to reach out to the minority community in this particular area. That kind of leadership is precisely what we need throughout higher education. So the aging population, the changing character of our families, the rapid growth in minorities, the decline in America's economic role in the world, and the dangers of a permanent underclass are bad enough. And on top of that, we are leaving the next generation somewhere between a $2 trillion and $3 trillion national debt because we've been unwilling to pay our own way. Indeed, we deliberately cut taxes excessively in 1981, and the result is a doubling of the national debt ever since. Now, we who happen to work in colleges and universities are, fortunately for us, and probably fortunately for the society we serve, not responsible for devising politically feasible solutions to all these problems. We are, however, profoundly responsible for exposing our students and ourselves to the realities of a changing world. It is no longer enough to offer a curriculum rooted in Western civilization alone, nor is it acceptable to offer a curriculum without foreign language and cultural requirements. No student should graduate who is not reasonably competent in written and spoken English, and no one should graduate who does not understand the nature of the world they will face out there, economically, racially, demographically, and politically. And having described the world as it is, not as it was, or not as we might wish it to be, we need to have a set of values, which we should rather unapologetically set forth. There is plenty of evidence that suggests that the American people, or a substantial portion of them, believe that colleges and universities have failed most profoundly in the area of ethics and values. We have even occasionally bragged that we are value-free or neutral on questions of investments or questions of human behavior. Our graduates are seen as the me-firsters, more interested in fattening their wallets than their minds. A society where significant numbers of us believe that the more or less unregulated pursuit of self-interest best serves the national interest is in deeper trouble than we realize. And I would only ask the question rhetorically, where did our young people get those values? The answer is complex, but we in education cannot fully excuse ourselves for our moral neutralism, or as Alan Bloom in his best-selling book, The Closing of the American Mind, characterizes it, moral relativism, which can only be read as an abdication of responsibility. As I thought about what a college or university can do about the desperate problems we face, however remote they may seem on a beautiful fall afternoon, I was struck by some remarks which Robert Fulham used at Middlebury College last spring. We in Washington are very conscious these days of the need for attribution. And some of these words speak in a simple way to our responsibilities as educators, and I quote, "Most of what I really need to know about how to live and what to do and how to be, I learned in kindergarten. Wisdom was not at the top of the graduate school mountains, but there in the sandbox at nursery school. These are the things I learned. Share everything, play fair, don't hit people, put things back where you found them, clean up your own mess, don't take things that are not yours, say you're sorry when you hurt somebody, wash your hands before you eat, flush, warm milk and cookies are good for you, live a balanced life, learn every day, take a nap every afternoon. And when you go out into the world, watch for traffic, hold hands and stick together. Be aware of wonder. Remember the little seed in the plastic cup. The roots go down and the plant goes up, and nobody really knows why. But we are all like that, goldfish and hamsters and white mice, and even the little seed in the plastic cup. They all die. So do we. And then remember the book about Dick and Jane, and the first word you learned, the biggest word of all, look. Everything you need to know is in there somewhere. The golden rule, and love, and basic sanitation, ecology, and politics, and sane living. Think of what a better world it would be if we all, the whole world, had cookies and milk about 3 in the afternoon and then lay down with our blankets for a nap. Or if we had a basic policy in our nation and other nations to always put things back where we found them and clean up our own messes. And it is still true, no matter how old you are, when you go out into the world, it is best to hold hands and stick together. Friends of Thomas Nelson College, I congratulate you on this occasion and on your good fortune in your new leadership. May you face the dangerous world with incisive analysis and simple values, and may you hold hands and stick together. And President Templin, may you live forever. Thank you very much.
It is a very humbling experience to have to follow Mr. Atwell. Senator Andrews, Senator Bobby Scott, other great leaders of the Virginia General Assembly who are devoted friends of education, College Board, the presidents, distinguished American educators, members of Dr. Templin's wonderful family. As chairman of the State Board for Community Colleges, I have responsibility for the 23 outstanding institutions that make up our statewide system. But I feel like today I'm going back to where I came from. 9 years ago, when Dr. Templin was appointed as dean at Piedmont Virginia Community College, I had just recently been elected chairman of the local advisory board for Piedmont Virginia Community College. Dr. Templin very quickly showed me his understanding of the organization of American education by summoning me out to his office, seating me down and telling me exactly what I could and could not do as chairman. My life has been sort of on a treadmill since then, but Bob, quite obviously, has gone on to bigger and better things. Bob, I respect and admire you. I envy your knowledge of education, and I particularly covet the seemingly easy grace with which you express your knowledge. The respect and affection that you demonstrate for everybody that you come into contact with is evidenced by the respect and affection that everyone has for you. I've come to see you in the past, as I will in the future, for advice, and your counsel has always been sound. For these reasons, it is a particular pleasure to be able to participate in the investiture today, and I would now ask you to come forward. I didn't overstate any of that, did I? Robert G. Templin, Jr., by the authority vested in me by the State Board for Community Colleges, I hereby vest in you the office of the President of Thomas Nelson Community College, together with the rights and responsibilities of that office. Congratulations. Thank you very much.